Hello, everyone. You are listening to another Monday Live edition of the Don Miller Show on your hometown station, 1520 WBZW. And today we're streaming on Orlando's News Talk Powerhouse, 660 WORL. If you have iHeartRadio or TuneIn.com. If you have iHeartRadio or TuneIn.com, go ahead and download that app because you can hear the show. Also, you can join us in our chat room at thedonmillershow.com. If you have any questions or comments, we got some great conversation for you today. My name is D'Amica Page, and here's your host, Don Miller.
Greetings and salutations.
You can't hold up random signs when I'm talking.
Just because you can't multitask, don't blame me.
Because you're holding up a sign telling me to say something that I'm already saying, so that totally throws me off.
Hello, everybody. Yes, it is. It's a black gentleman who hails from the north. He brings you greetings, and he also wants you to also understand that everything that glitter is not gold. Thank you so much, everybody. Welcome back to the Don Miller Show. It's a Monday edition of that thing we call the Don Miller Show. And for those who have questioned my ability to use the English language, I want to just take a moment before we get out of the gate. My dialect does not reflect my intellect. Try my ass. 407.
You've been tried and true.
407, okay?
I like that.
407-774-8255. Try me. Try me, Dave. Let them try me, Dave, okay? My name is Don Miller. Welcome again to another edition of the Don Miller Show.
You got facts and figures from 1917.
I was corrected the other day by a young lady who questioned my ability to use the English language. I appreciate her taking the opportunity to waste her damn time and mine. Okay? Talking to me about how I speak and my word usage. Don Miller right here on the microphone. There she is. She's April. She's a very attractive blonde lady, and we want to tell the Caucasian community that we support you too, because everybody need to be working. I want everybody to have a job. Thank you so much. Listen, this is real important. Today we're having a conversation that we have gone back and forth on for a number of weeks. Many people who follow this show over a time period know that when the Trayvon Martin story, the story of a young man in Sanford, Florida, last February of 12, he was shot down and killed last February. It became a national story because many of the sensationalist activists joined in, and of course the representation for Mr. Trayvon's family on the money chase is talking more than the representation on the criminal action. So when you got the money chasers, okay, talking as much as you got the prosecution, then you know you're going to be in for an amazing conversation. Today we want to talk about the use of social media in this conversation. I've been engaged in this conversation from day one. I've gone to every rally, the major rallies they've had in Seminole County. D'Amica, of course, we reported live via television from two of those rallies. We have covered this for the BBC, the British Broadcasting Network. We have talked to the people on the ground in Sanford, Florida. We have engaged with the Nation of Islam and the Black Panther Party regarding this conversation. And tonight we wanted to talk about the role of social media in this case, because I'm starting to see the many people who are going to places like Facebook and Twitter and just presenting their opinions. And a lot of times people don't understand this is just their opinions. And it is driving some ridiculous conversation. Now, I think everybody is free to engage as they will, but I think it has gone from mass communications to ass communications, okay? There are a bunch of idiots presenting conversations that are absolutely ridiculous, and I think, quite frankly, are going to sway the way this situation goes in terms of the way the public sees it. So, to reach out and engage in this kind of conversation, I would be remiss if I didn't go out and get one of the great communicators of my time. He has been in the media business for the better part of 40 years. He was a young reporter in Detroit who covered the riots in Detroit. He was also a professor at the University of Central Florida Nicholson School of Communication, where he covered broadcasting. He brought me over to do a full class on broadcasting to the Nicholson School of Communication at the University of Central Florida. He is my good friend, one of the most brilliant scholars I know, Dr. Ken Raybach. Hey, Doc.
Hey, thanks so much, Don.
You're going to join us today and have this real conversation. Now, you know we have real conversations on here, right?
By the way, I love the way you talk.
Okay, good. Okay. You have never corrected my English, and you got how many PhDs?
At least 5.
At least, okay? He has never corrected my English. So for all those who want to correct my English, hold on for a minute.
But he appreciates your intellect.
Yeah, see, my English don't affect the way I present this dialogue. So please, thank you so much, our guest, Dr. Ken Raybach. We're going to be talking again about the way social media is playing currently into this conversation. Of course, last week, the judge on this case decided that it was the right thing to do, quite frankly, to not allow some of the conversation about young Trayvon Martin's past into the courtroom.
Into the trial,
okay?
Right.
And she did the right thing, but she also made a decision after the prosecution requested a gag order to stand down on allowing or giving a gag order, which I think was more damaging than letting them know he smoked weed and had a gun. Okay? So, Dr. Raybach, how do you see social media playing into the message that millions of Americans, especially African Americans who thrive on emotion as opposed to information, how do you see this playing out in the American public?
Well, I see it as a process of investing. Certain experts, but also certain figures, certain spokespeople will be chosen and invested with the power to drive the situation, to drive events. And they'll be invested by means of modern communication techniques.
Okay.
So cell phones, tweets, the whole apparatus will invest people with some kind of appearance of authority and at least the authority to act on the behalf of their tweet mates, for example.
Okay.
The people that they communicate with. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting you say that because, once again, this conversation started a while ago, and it really became a national conversation when it started to be driven by what I call the sensationalist activists. These people that are only activists when the conversation is sensational and carries media hype, okay? Like Al Sharpton and many of the sensationalist activists who profit from other people's pain, so to speak.
Sure.
So all of a sudden, it's a national story. It's a national story about race. When you break this story down, when you get to, as my grandma used to say, the nitty-gritty of this story, I don't know if race was involved from the onset.
But Dr. K, we're talking about how this conversation was presented, or the narrative that the media gave the American people. But do you think that the use of social media being that outlet where more people are driven to for their source of information versus the conventional means of news and information had more to play with into that narrative?
Absolutely. And it's kind of like people can sit back with their devices and write the script.
You know,
write the script for other people.
You're right. I call them idiots with devices. And I said that today. You know, the interesting thing is this is going to play out in a very interesting way. And I'll say this because there are many people all over the country talking about this conversation. I went to Sanford days after this happened. D'Amica and I and several members of our show, April, you may have been there, okay? And we went to Sanford. And the feeling in Sanford initially was outrage from white folk as well as black folk, correct? April, you were absolutely outraged, correct?
Yes, I didn't agree with it at all.
And until we got to start hearing the story and the way the story was unfolding, and people were like, wait a minute, maybe we need to listen a little more. And in comes people like Sharpton, who may bring attention, but he also brings division, right? Yeah. So my concern was those.
I'm not sure what Sharpton brings. But.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. Okay.
Yeah, you could look at that.
I'll tell you what. He ain't got a lot of white folk who believe anything he say is real. I can tell you that now. I'm speaking of
showbiz.
Okay, it's showbiz. But when I saw this conversation, when we first went to the initial march, And there were so many white people from Seminole County, from that community, in that march. They were there. We were there with them. And then the second march comes about, and I turned to D'Amica and Tevra, and I said, wait a minute, where are the white people? And the fact of the matter is, when we insert some of the activists who are sensationalist activists, we push away those people who are concerned and really care and believe that it's an issue that they should engage in. And I think when you look at social media does not have a filter, but it also doesn't have any guidelines. Anybody can say whatever they want to say with information or without information, not like you and I were taught in an environment that teaches us you got to be careful when you're doing this for real.
Well, but Dr. K is a journalist, so there are things that you learn as a journalist. But that's not the case when it comes to social media. So, Dr. K, how does that impact people and how we gather information in regards to this and moving forward?
Well, the first thing I have to do is go back to what Don said, and I have to look at those white people who showed up. Mm-hmm. They showed up pretty spontaneously.
Yeah.
They were almost unmediated.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And by mediated, I mean used by the media. Mm-hmm. There by virtue of the media. They were pretty much unmediated.
Right.
Just a conscious march.
Yes, it was a conscious march. I was there.
Their conscience was affected.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they started to be manipulated by Reverend Sharpton and others, that's when they kind of backed off, because they didn't want to be part of some sort of bandwagon. They didn't want to join in a movement. They just wanted to express their conscience.
And that is exactly what I saw, because I was amazed, and we headed over to Willow Tree Cafe and the people in the community, and they were just as appalled as any of the other people.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, they were no longer there.
Well, because the white people thought this was about justice, and Al Sharpton said it was about race. So, I think the people that had a conscious involvement in it, were there for different reasons.
Listen, we're going to take a break. Our guest, Dr. Ken Raybach, he's a brilliant professor. He is truly a scholar. We're talking about social media and the upcoming Trayvon Martin case of George Zimmerman, who was on trial for murder of a young man, Trayvon Martin, in Sanford, Florida. Please feel free to join us. 407-774-8255 is the number to dial, 407-774-8255. We'll be back in a moment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Don Miller Show. It's a Monday edition of the Don Miller Show on your hometown station, 1520 WBZW. Also on Orlando's News Talk Powerhouse, 660 WORL. Give us a call if you have some questions or comments, or you can join us in the chat room. That phone number you can call us at is 407-774-8255, or go to the chat room at thedonmillershow.com. Here's your host, Don Miller.
Again, our guest, Dr. Ken Raybach. He is a professor. He's a scholar. He has how many PhDs? He got more PhDs than he got a lot of PhDs, and he's never corrected my English. Thank you, Doc. Okay, I appreciate that at a high level. I know I struggle.
That really bothered you, huh?
Yeah, that bothered me again.
I appreciate the articulate inner city dialect.
Absolutely. You know why? Because you got the same dialogue over there. The articulate inner city dialogue. It's an urban dialogue. That's what I'm going to call it.
Yeah, it's actually more articulate in some ways than the King's English.
Absolutely. Dr. Raybach, of course, you have been around even before social media. The conversation just recently has started to talk about, based on the verdict in this case, some civil unrest. And I've heard through the grapevine that they have been in communication with the authorities at a very high level because of possible civil unrest. And you, as a young reporter in Detroit, you covered the riots in Detroit.
I covered riots every month in Detroit, too, when the Tigers won the World Series.
Okay, and that wasn't black folk.
Detroit was a riot culture.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and it started. Nobody could argue that the original 1967 riots weren't black folks, but the whites caught up for the World Series and for different
Red Wings, Tigers.
Yeah, and those were riots. They were riots, plain and simple. They weren't really much different than the riots that I covered. Following the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And, what's typical about that is Detroit's a riot city and a riot culture, and Sanford isn't. So I'm not sure how much you can project into that. Orlando's not really a riot culture either.
So let's talk about riot culture. That's an interesting way you put that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Riot culture. Sure. What makes up a riot culture? Because I agree with you. I think that social media is going to drive this conversation, but people who live in Seminole County, Florida, they really ain't trying to riot.
But the difference is, and Dr. Cal, I want you to explain, is that this particular case is bringing a lot of people from outside of Sanford. So with that element, do you still think that the potential for riots is still pretty slim to none based on what you just said with that concept?
Yeah, I would. Social identity tends, the riot theory is really bad, and it goes back to probably the 80s was the last really good work in the theory of what causes urban riots. And the Arab Spring didn't help much because that was pretty confusing and pretty specific to the Middle East. Mm-hmm. But in general, it does require a social identity, a real sense of identifying with a certain aspect of society. And when you talked about the white crossover liberal class marching with blacks immediately after that first Trayvon incident and gathering, that's a pretty widespread kind of identity. So
okay.
Nothing here, creates a specific sense that one social group is being subjugated and needs to rise up in arms against the exploiter.
So again, you say that there is nothing here that presents that dialogue or that type of conversation for real, right. An attempt to rise up against the exploiter. But who do you see as the exploiter in this manufactured national story?
Well,
this is a manufactured national story, Doc.
Yeah, do a pretty thorough search and go back to the first instances of predictions of rioting that might occur as a result of a Trayvon Martin verdict, and you'll find the Republicans and the right wing all over it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah, and you almost have to get a really good news group reader to go back into the really specific news groups from the radical right as well as the white separatists.
Yes.
And then you'll find the real seeds of the Trayvon Martin riots. Christen them in advance.
Absolutely. D'Amica's been covering the KKK or the white supremacists in terms of what they're saying on their feeds.
Right, their threads.
On their threads here in Central Florida. And what are they saying, D'Amica?
They're saying they're not promoting violence, but they are encouraging their people to get their arms ready so that they can be prepared for the riots. So there's a lot of talk in social media on different threads for different organizations about preparing for a riot if the verdict is not in their favor. I don't know what in their favor really means, but that's,
Karl Rove started all that. Mm-hmm. You kind of plant a seed and disinform, but it has to be kind of a predictive seed so that you kind of seed your own your own political developments,
right,
and then respond to them after they come to fruition.
Yeah, because during the beginning of this conversation, I had the opportunity to talk on the air and in person with the leaders of one of the black nationalist movements. And they came to town and they made a speech about they was going to do this and that. But all 7 of them rode down here together in a damn Honda Accord, okay? So I'm like, okay, you the black nationalists? Remember that, D'Amica? All 7 of y'all, all 7 of the black nationalists, okay, rode down here together in a Honda Accord. So are these revolutionary organizations, allegedly, are they real or is this just conversation? Sorry about that, Doc. I gotta say it the way I feel it. We went to see this guy, and I'm like, they was getting out the Honda Accord like it was a circus car. I'm like, what the hell is the leader of the black nationalists?
Yeah.
He was the driver. And there was 7 of them in a Honda Accord, and they had all these fatigues on. Man, I know it smelled all the...
They look very militant,
heck in there. Yeah, they look militant, but they rode together. Okay?
That's another one of D'Amica's social change items. When I went to interview Louis Farrakhan, and of course it was very secretive and very confidential, I had to be kind of snuck in. When I pulled up to the inner city church where he was going to speak with me, a bunch of Jeeps with 3 to 6 people armed with Uzis drove by, providing security for Farrakhan. So that's really an interesting sign of changing times.
But that's the difference too, because once you talk about the Nation of Islam, and I've sat down and both in person, D'Amica and I, and we've met with the Nation of Islam, and we understand their position on this issue. I think the Nation of Islam and Minister Farrakhan are more concerned with saving the next 10,000 Trayvons than focusing on an uprising based on the death of one young man. Yeah. Okay, a tragedy it was. We all agree. But if you are really a movement, then I think it's more important for you to figure out a way that you can save the next young man from finding himself in this situation, as opposed to standing out in front of a courthouse and riding in the hot Florida sun in a Honda Accord with no air and your fatigues on. I'm sorry. To me, that's just my personal opinion. Go ahead, D'Amica.
No, I just really want to get clarification from Dr. K.
Yeah.
With all of the people coming here to Orlando for this case, all of the out-of-towners, do you still not think that they would create the type of culture that you're seeing? It has to be present for that rioting type atmosphere. Because we know Sanford isn't, but what about the people who are coming here from outside of Sanford?
Yeah, I think the story that's playing, unless the people who occupied Wall Street, the Occupy movement, you'd have to have a massive influx, in order to have any kind of influence of that nature. But the story that's been portrayed in the media.
Hey Doc, we got to take a quick break. Okay. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with our guest, Dr. Ken Raybach. He is a professor and a scholar. We'll be back right after this. Everybody, welcome back to Monday edition of the Don Miller Show. We thank you so much for joining us. You can find us Monday through Thursday, and we're here from 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You can always feel free to head over to thedonmillershow.com. Their conversation in the chat room is always insightful. D'Amica Page, of course, joins me in the studio, as she always does. April Adams, of course, writing down her conversation. April, the good wife.
Hey, Don.
Listen, this is real important. I'm having a conversation. I want to have this conversation. We got some great guests coming up. Dr. Ken Raybach has been our guest. He is a frequent contributor to the Don Miller Show. He is a professor of media, and Dr. K teaches everything. You name it, he's taught at journalism. But I want to have this conversation today because I am hearing on the street that people are preparing themselves for a significant uprising in the Sanford, Florida community where I live. So I want to know, and I'm concerned that if there's going to be this uprising in this community, I want to be prepared for it. But I think it is being driven by social media. And my conversation today is simply, what impact is social media having on this case? What impact has it had? And will it be at the forefront of a racial crisis? Again, Dr. Raybach said something very interesting earlier on. He talked about a riot culture. And for those of us from the Midwest, as I am, we've seen rioting up close and personal. And why do people riot? What brings people to that point that they want to be destructive? And many of us, we've seen them in championship environments when teams win games or championship games. But the conversation in a small town like Sanford, Florida, a town that has had issues way before the death of this young man, is this a concern? And I can't tell you. I don't know, because I'm telling you right now, living in this community, I am seeing things that I've never seen before. D'Amica and I personally were not put out, but we were called some names, April, you remember this, and asked to leave a restaurant that we had always gone to, that all of us, Dr. Matt and D'Amica and Tevra and the whole team after the show, we went to this restaurant in Sanford a lot until one day, I guess, we happened upon this restaurant when it was redneck night. And they weren't quite friendly to us. So, again, I don't know if it's a conversation that's a legitimate one. I started covering this case out of the gate. April, you were there. We were out there on the ground during the initial march.
Yes.
With many of the people involved in that march. Mayor Triplett, Congresswoman Brown, who represents Florida in the United States House of Representatives. Many of those people, Reverend Jackson, came and sat with me, and we had dinner and talked about this. And I think the attitude of those people who will be on this jury, and I think that's what nobody's talking about. Of course, the people on the side of this conversation from a civil action are keeping it in the media, and I don't know how that's going to play out. But at the end of the day, I think that this has made a lot of people nervous. It has made the people who run that engine in Sanford, Florida, nervous, which is probably going to be a problem for a lot of people. We are going to continue this conversation. We're getting ready to be joined here on the Don Miller Show by Dr. Camille Z. Charles. She's a Ph.D. She is a professor in social sciences. She's the chair of the Department of Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. She has written extensively about race relations, and, of course, I was excited about having her on the show, and I thank you so much. Hey, Professor, how you doing?
Hi, I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you joining us at short notice. But you have consistently written about race in America, and have you been following this case? And we want to know your thoughts on social media and the engagement of African Americans. How do you see this ending up if the verdict is not viewed in favor of black people in this country?
I think that this is a case where the black community would be justified in their outrage. I don't know that it necessarily means that we're going to see, a repeat of L.A. after the verdict in the Rodney King beating trial.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that by virtue of social media, you have the capacity to reach a lot more people more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have more people talking about it, so that one of the things that I think is a good thing is that there are more outlets for people to express their outrage,
mm-hmm.
and to have other people hear them, and to be connected with others who are like-minded in their outrage, which could help, sort of stem any kind of civil unrest.
Okay.
I don't see, I wouldn't predict that people were going to take buses into Sanford to riot the way that they took buses in to protest their outrage over the police not doing enough in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, it can serve both positive and negative functions. I think the flip side of it is that it was interesting to me that social media also organized white supremacist groups
mm-hmm.
and others who thought that George Zimmerman was justified in what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And
wait, Professor, slow down. See, two things you've just done. We got to be careful when you were in Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots, correct?
Yes, I was.
And I understood that, Professor. I totally, absolutely understood that, because I saw the violation that the police did on Mr. King. Mm-hmm. No matter what the situation, that was uncalled for, correct?
Yes.
So I was even moved to a point where me, being as conservative as I am, say, okay, you know what? All right, I understand that outrage. But this outrage here is based, quite frankly, on misinformation, Professor. And even with social media today, the outrage in Sanford should be on the cops, and we should stand down until we understand what happened by paying attention to this trial. This is not about race, Professor. I know they've probably spread this across the country as being about race. I think George Zimmerman would have killed a white dude under the same circumstances.
But would the police have handled it in the same way?
Depending on who the white dude was, and yes, and his demographic. Sanford cops didn't care not only about black folk, but about poor folk. So, yeah, that's a good question, though. That's a great point you make.
Okay. And
yes.
So
again, the outrage should be at the cops.
Absolutely.
Yes.
No, and I don't disagree with that.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that that's the story that's going to be spun.
Right.
Right.
Well, the story's already spun. You're right.
And so I think that, again, if you go back to what happened when there were the efforts to get more media attention, right, because nothing was really happening.
Well, Professor, Professor,
in the case.
Professor, it was happening, and that's the point that I'm sharing with you. It was happening. Now, the media attention you're talking about was the national media attention, which ain't going to make a bit of difference in a circuit court in Seminole County, Florida, where, on the average, you might get one black juror. So, yeah, the nation knew what happened, but it won't make a difference in a courtroom. So when Sharpton shows up, and many of those activists show up, yeah, it's going to bring attention to it, but those people who are going to be called for jury duty start to stand down when we engage people like Reverend Sharpton. You know that, Professor. You're a scholar.
I don't know that that's always the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, I don't think it's fair to make those kinds of assumptions. And again,
well, let me give you the history of Seminole County, Florida. In the history of Seminole County, Florida, they've had one African-American judge. In the history of that county, they've had one prosecutor to rise to the ranks, okay, of Deputy Chief Prosecutor Donna Gerner, who was one of our legal people here on the show. You got to understand the history of that county. So I was more concerned about not rubbing those people the wrong way, which is already done now, than engaging the nation in this conversation. So please go ahead. They don't have a black judge.
I understand that.
Okay, in that circuit.
On the one hand, though, you're arguing that this isn't about race. And so if this isn't about race, the absence of a black judge shouldn't matter.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
If this isn't about race.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's about poverty,
mm-hmm.
then, again, the race of the jury, the race of the prosecutor, the race of the judge, the
mm-hmm.
race of the police officer
mm-hmm.
shouldn't matter.
Okay. Okay, no, I'm saying that night was about bad policing. That agency has gone through several chiefs. Now they got a black chief, which is not going to make much of a difference probably. But when I say it's not about race, I believe that based on the circumstances coming up to this case, that Mr. Zimmerman was not out to kill a black guy. And that is what they sold us early on. That's why I went there.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I was right there on the ground. The New York Times had quoted me. I was there. And that is what they sold America, that this crazy white dude had killed this 13-year-old black kid. That's where the outrage came from. And again, we have to be careful when we buy into this. See, black folk, we about emotion and not information. The other people, they kind of want to wait a little bit. They may jump out emotionally, but they're going to stand down as the information presents itself. And my concern is that in a jury of whose peers, because they're not Zimmerman's peers either. Please understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? These are not going to be Zimmerman's peers. And their outrage will be directed at the people who manufactured a national dialogue. So that's my concern. Go ahead, Professor. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think that the issue here is going to be, as you said, perception,
right?
Rather
Absolutely.
than reality.
Mm-hmm.
And in my estimation, because the average person has a very difficult time distinguishing between race and poverty.
Okay.
Okay, so we tend to associate, as a country, on average, we associate poverty with black people.
No, well, yeah, okay, all right.
Again, public opinion.
Okay.
Supports that idea.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, and so as long as that's true, my argument is simply that even on the ground, unconsciously or consciously, because again, a lot of what happens with race, with prejudice, with racism, with all of that now, has much more to do with what's happening unconsciously, things that we're not aware of.
Yep.
And so my argument is simply that just because the facts of the case don't warrant paying attention to race
mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that that's not going to happen.
Okay.
okay? And it's going to be very difficult for people to tease those two things apart, depending on how the verdict comes out. If you're correct, and this is about bad policing, and it doesn't matter whether Trayvon was black or not, George Zimmerman was going to shoot.
He was going to kill somebody eventually. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
Then, nonetheless, again, and only what I'm familiar with at the national level suggests that he ought to be found guilty.
Okay.
Okay, and again, that is irrespective of race.
Okay.
But if it doesn't turn out that way, and in fact, whether it turns out that way or not, there is going to be a subset of the population that perceives this as racial.
Okay, and because let's talk for a minute about that, because I contend that there are some people out here who benefit from the racial conversation, so they're going to push it even more. And Mr. Sharpton is one of those people. He has not gone to Chicago, where over 800 young black men have been murdered by other black men. That's a crisis to me.
Yeah.
He has not gone to Detroit. As a matter of fact, in Boston already, 50 young black men have been murdered. So all of a sudden, he goes to the conversation where there's an alleged white guy, because the guy's not white, has murdered this alleged 13-year-old kid. So can you help me understand how people like that continue to exist and get favor with black folk, Professor?
Because I think there's so much in our society that is still racial. That's the easy. It's certainly the easy target.
Okay.
Right. There's a lot less ambiguity around it. It's a wound that's still sore, and we understand it.
Okay.
I think that, and I think the other piece you have to bring into this is the policing aspect of it.
Absolutely.
So there is this issue around policing and the black community, and so I think it's again something we can all get behind.
Yeah.
Where in the black community we want to, right or wrong, we want to make excuses about the black-on-black violence. It's harder to understand because it's wrapped up in poverty and long-term poverty and poor educational outcomes and generation to generation. And that's what
the scholars.
And that's a harder sell.
Yeah, but that's what the scholars like yourself. You are a scholar. You are a high-end former presidential advisor. You're a scholar. And so I understand, you're right, that's a harder sell. But for someone as educated as many of you all, how is that a harder sell? It's a legitimate conversation, Professor.
Yes, it is a legitimate conversation, and it's not a hard sell for me.
I know it's not. That's why, look, Professor, after this break, give us one more moment. We're going to take a quick break. Our guest, Dr. Camille Charles, she is a brilliant professor at the University of Pennsylvania. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation. 407-774-8255, and you want to jump right in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Don Miller Show on your hometown station, 1520 WBZW. Also on Orlando's News Talk Powerhouse, 660 WORL. If you have some questions or comments about our conversation, we're talking about Trayvon Martin. We're talking about social media, race relation, potential riots if the verdict is not favorable, whatever that means to you. Give us a call, 407-774-8255. Do you want to go to this call first?
Let's take this call. Hey, Rich, you're on the Don Miller Show.
Thank you so much for taking my call, and I love your show.
Thank you.
I feel so troubled by the conversation. First, I'll tell you, I was in Norfolk, Virginia 2 weeks ago, where my great nephew was being presented at the church. My relations there are all black, African American on that side, and I'm a Italian guy from Brooklyn, one of those guys, but lovely family. And my fear as we stood in that church is that I wanted to just know that little boy was going to grow up to have the kind of future that he deserved to have. And I felt confident because his family's so good, so strong. His mom, his dad, just great church going, just good people, surrounded by my niece, her kids. I know there's a wound in this country. I know goes way back.
Yep.
But I'm looking for solutions. My fear is that, like you're saying, there's going to be people on both sides of the aisle that are going to put that finger in the wound for political advantage,
absolutely,
for sensationalism. And I work in Sanford too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a veterinarian there, so the community is a wonderful community.
It's a great community.
But it's a great community. I don't see any anger. I don't see this, and I don't want people from outside coming in to make things terrible. It's a terrible tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, what happened was a tragedy. I don't know what your gut feeling is on what happened there. And I do want to know if there was like policing errors and stuff. But my feeling is kind of like this might have been a horrible tragedy that might have been averted. But you know what? Who knows what was said on both sides?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rich, for your call. Listen, our guest, of course, she's joining us tonight. She is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Camille Charles. She's the author of Won't You Be My Neighbor? Race, Class, and Residence in Los Angeles. Dr. Charles, you teach sociology, and has there been any dialogue or engagement with you and the students you teach as it relates to this conversation?
I have to be honest. I've been in administrative work for the last few years, so I haven't taught much. But I teach a summer program, and we do use current events as a starting point to kind of talk about race in the United States. And so certainly we've talked about it there. And students that I meet with individually or in small groups, these are the kinds of things that they want to talk about.
Absolutely.
So, and I think what I should have said before is not so much that it's complicated, because it's actually pretty simple. It's messy.
Yes, it is. That's a better word, Doc.
Yeah.
It is messy. You're absolutely right. Because at the end of this, Doc, and my concern is, as someone who sat down with Reverend Sharpton and, of course, Reverend Jackson all in the same day, Reverend Jackson had more of an interest in what the real story is. Remember that, D'Amica? Reverend Sharpton had come to his own conclusion when he got off the plane. And that,
because he hasn't had an agenda.
Right.
When you have an agenda, you already have your conclusion.
You know, and I sat down with Reverend Jackson, who I've known since I was 3 or 4 years old. His interest was, okay, what happened here? Reverend Sharpton was like, let's do this. Camera's rolling. And that scared me. I was like, whoa, don't you want to know what happened? No, they don't care what happened, because he doesn't make money on people coming together, unfortunately. He makes money on people being divided. And then we have all these people who engage in social media, okay, and they don't care about information. They are driven by emotion. And it is a concern, as someone with a 13-year-old child who asked a question one night driving home, Daddy, why didn't Mr. Trayvon just run? And, Doc, how do I answer that? He said to me, why didn't he run? Now, I got to be honest with my kid. And I said, well, let me explain something to you, son. Mr. Trayvon comes from a mindset of confrontation as opposed to conflict resolution. We got to understand and save the next Trayvon. And I don't think anybody's concerned about talking to young men about engagement. You're not a punk just because you run, Doc. The girlfriend on the phone says, Trayvon, run. He tells her, I'm not going to run. So we got to be careful. Either we're going to make this a conversation about race relations in America, or about saving young black men who don't know how to deal with situations. I raise my hand on saving the next kid.
Absolutely. No, and I think that there are plenty of parents who do that. Now, how much children listen,
yeah,
especially at his age,
yeah,
is another story. And I think the problem is that as much as we want to believe that we are the most influential with our children at that particular age, their friends are actually
the most influential.
Extremely influential at that age.
Yeah.
And their girlfriends and wanting to appear to be men.
Right.
When they're still boys.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
And I think that is absolutely an issue that we need to be confronting. And this is why I say it's messy.
Yeah, it's messy.
Right? Because for whatever reason, we're still trapped in an either-or conversation. And so if we're going to take responsibility and say that it's something that we need to work on ourselves, somehow in our heads we think that that's absolving racialized policing and other kinds of things, when that doesn't have to be true. right? There are many instances when there are both things that we can do as a community for ourselves, and there are things systemically that need to be repaired.
Absolutely. You mentioned racialized policing. That is a problem in America, that has been a problem in America, and that I think will continue to be a problem. And I think many young people, with the resurgence of President Obama, coming from an urban environment, just kind of felt like things were going to change. And you, being a former Obama advisor, has there been no conversation about building better relationships with the police in the black community?
Well, again,
put you on the spot, didn't I, Doc? Yes, I did.
No, I think that our assumption that there were going to be big changes around race were misguided.
Well, come on, Doc. You and I know we went to school somewhere and engaged. Cut it out. Now, see, this is when the PhDs start talking.
I think there are plenty of everyday folk who understand that, and I think that's why you saw the turnout that you saw. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't get upset and wish things were otherwise, so that there could be that kind of conversation and that kind of engagement. I think we also made some assumptions about his own orientation and his own perspective around these issues that weren't necessarily.
Absolutely.
We had nothing to base those assumptions on other than the color of his skin.
Well, Dr. Charles, we want to thank you, Camille Charles. She's a PhD, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Her book, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Race, Class, and Residence in Los Angeles. Dr. Charles, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Listen, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to switch gears, go into the same conversation, but from a different perspective. D'Amica Page, April the Good Wife, hang with us. We'll be back in a moment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the second half of the Don Miller Show. It's your Monday edition of the Don Miller Show right here on your hometown station, 1520 WBZW. Also streaming on 660 WORL, Orlando's News Talk Powerhouse. Give us a call. We're having some conversation today about the Trayvon Martin case, also social media and the potential for a riot if the verdict is not in someone's favor, whoever that may be or whatever you think about that. We want to know your thoughts about it. 407-774-8255. Our chat room is on fire. Give us a call, guys. We want to know your thoughts. I'm D'Amica Page, and here's your host, Don Miller.
Thank you again, D'Amica Page. Our guest today is Professor of Journalism, Dr. Ken Raybach. He is he's always on the show. He's a frequent guest of the show. He is my personal professor. He's a former professor at the University of Central Florida's Nicholson School of Broadcasting, former reporter who covered news for more than 40 years. We are also getting ready to be joined here on the show by prominent criminal defense attorney who is a winner at a very high level. She is my friend. We welcome to the show Attorney Diana M. Tennis. Hello, Attorney. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Don.
Listen, we're talking about the unprecedented use of social media as it relates to the current Trayvon Martin case, and Mr. O'Meara is using social media at a very high level. You, as an attorney, have used social media, and I want to talk a little bit about the negatives and positives of such and how it affects something that you're very familiar with, picking a jury in a high-profile case.
Well, I think it can cut all sorts of different directions. You know, this is the perfect storm. You've got a case that has an extended pretrial interest, which is not typical.
Right.
You also have a case that isn't a whodunit. So it's not like you could come out a year ahead of a trial on a whodunit and really make use of social media. This was meant for and built for a self-defense case. And so I think the initial thought was a lot of negative stuff has come out, and we want to even the playing field, and we want to come out with some points that the public doesn't have because the police department did such an abysmal job at the front end of defending their own actions. I mean, it was really a PR debacle. It was a debacle.
Absolutely.
So I think the initial thought was level the playing field, and it's, you know, and it's morphed from there. And whether it's morphed beyond to some sort of backlash, whether it's gone too far to the point that you're going to be tainting a jury or maybe having people unhappy with how much you've used social media, I don't know. But this is this is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it. And it may be cutting the way for the future.
Well. Listen, Counselor, I hope not, quite frankly. But I have another question for you, as it relates to as a criminal defense attorney, and you are one at a very high level. Why, in this case, is it called racism when Attorney O'Meara decides to attempt to present the history of the young man, as opposed to in any other case when a criminal defense attorney wants to paint a picture to save somebody they're defending? You've done it before, Counselor. Why is it racism all of a sudden when Attorney O'Meara is saying, look, this is who this kid really was? Now, is it important? Is it admissible? Who cares? But why is that racism?
Oh God, Don, it's so.
Come on, attorney. Come on. Yeah.
It's so not what it's about. I mean, as somebody who has fought the clear racist bias in our legal community in the criminal justice system for 20 years, I fought it.
Yes, you have.
And I loathe it, and I hate it, and I want to have that conversation each and every time it presents itself. But Mark O'Meara did not create the context of racism in this case. He did not. He didn't. That narrative. He came on the scene, and it was already a racist story, a story about racism. I think, all told, it is unlikely that racism will actually be a player in the courtroom. But he can't do anything about the fact that prior to his getting involved, it was a black versus white story, a narrative, and he had to, again, I think, try to even the playing field. I don't think most of this stuff is going to be admissible long term, and I don't think it's fair to cast aspersions on what he's doing when everybody else wanted to play the race card closer to the front. But I guess we'll see. I don't want this to become the thing that divides this community in a way that is even worse than the situation was before. But people are using it for their own ends. I mean, it's clearly being manipulated by powers way outside our community that have absolutely no interest in seeing us all work better together. And I think that's terribly unfortunate.
And Diane, attorney, you listen. Mark's a good dude. Okay, and to hear a conversation in an environment where people are saying or calling his lawyer names simply because he has taken on a case, which is what lawyers do, okay, and to say, oh, he's this or he's that, it's hard for a guy like me who try real hard to think outside the box and engage people, because this is just not right. Okay, he is defending his client, and anyone engaged in this process understands you got to defend your client. You got to present who this person is, and it's just unfortunate because it hurts me. It is definitely going to hurt this community. We live in a great community, and this is either way it goes, it's not going to be positive for this community. Dr. Raybach, are you still there?
Absolutely.
Dr. Raybach, you've covered race relations nationally for a long, long time. When you see a manufactured racial story, this is what this is, correct?
Sure, absolutely.
How does it affect...
by conservative and left right-wing interests.
Okay, but how do you deal with this, or how have you seen this over your 40-plus years as a professor and a media person? How do you see this playing out years ago when you worked in urban areas with jury selection, and you've covered the courts in Detroit and many other cities?
Well, I think the original effort on the part of the right-wing groups online...
So you keep saying right-wing. So to you, this is political.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Is to create an online as well as a international news climate that will influence the selection of the jury. I think that's been pretty intentional from the very beginning.
Okay.
Otherwise, there wouldn't be much involvement altogether.
Attorney, you have picked juries in Seminole County, Florida, and you've done it for a long time. You know the makeup of the jury in Seminole County, Florida better than anybody. This is what you do. How difficult is it going to be to pick a jury under these circumstances?
Well, This case is topsy-turvy, and I don't think our usual labels of right-wing, left-wing, conservative, liberal, they actually are all kind of messed up in this one.
Yeah.
I think if Mark O'Meara were worried for a split second that he could not get a jury that was open-minded to his client's position, we would have dealt with a motion for a change of venue. I think you're not going to go anywhere in the state of Florida that people are not going to have been exposed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is going to be relatively shockingly easy to get a jury of 6 folks who, despite the fact that they've heard about it, are open-minded. I honestly think it is not going to be terribly difficult. And I will tell you that, Seminole County is predominantly white, and it is very unlikely that in those 500 potential jurors, you're going to have more than, call it 50 blacks, and it'll be more like 30.
30, yeah.
So, the bad news is the bad news. I think that this will be, unfortunately, a jury that is likely to be predominantly, if not all white, which will make the potential acquittal, if that happens, be seen all the more in a racial light that is unfair and unfortunate. But there's no way to change that, Don. It's not like you
It's demographics.
For this case, we're going to move all of the blacks in the big group of 500 to the front, and we're going to pick from them first so that everybody feels better about it. There's no way to do that.
It's impossible.
It's just so, I think it is just terribly likely to be a very white jury, and that will lead the community to thinking whatever it thinks when the dust comes.
Okay.
Attorney, I wanted to also mention, since we're talking about demographics and picking the jury, how do you feel about the fact that the Gallup poll did a survey, and the percentage of black people who closely follow this case is extremely high, whereas the percentage of white people who follow this case has been extremely low? So how does that play, or does it play at all, into the perception of the people who will be pooled for this jury?
Oh, it totally makes a difference, because at this point, the judge isn't going to kick off people who say they've heard of it, because everybody on the planet has heard of it.
Absolutely.
But as soon as they say they've followed it closely, they have thoughts about it, they have beliefs because of what they've seen, they have strong feelings. Anything that they say that would put a reasonable doubt on their ability to be fair and impartial means they get gone. And that means you're even less likely
to have a black
on your
Absolutely.
On your final jury.
Yeah.
It's terribly unfortunate, because that is going to leave an obvious feeling that this was some sort of racial verdict. And that's not what we want. That's not what anybody in this community
wants. And it goes back to my conversation, Attorney, of when I talked about when the national activists show up, they bring attention, but they also bring division, because the people who make up Seminole County and Seminole County's jury pool are going to be people that in many cases were turned off by the national activists showing up. And that's the challenge.
Well, and not only that, Attorney, but don't you also think that the fact that we've made it about race it's really a disservice to actually seeking justice in this case?
Well, sure.
Or the perception that we've obtained justice in this case.
Absolutely. And it does a disservice to all the really legitimate problems we have with racial bias in our system.
Yes.
I mean, from everything from eyewitness identifications to cop bias, sentencing bias, to arrest bias, to powder versus crack.
Absolutely.
There's a million legitimate racial discussions that I am dying to have. It just kills me that we have to do it in a case that really doesn't seem to rise to that level. But I agree with you. I mean, I'm always worried about potential jurors who will not want to go home to their neighborhood and say, I voted not guilty. I am very worried.
That's tough. That's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
Yeah.
How do you hold it against folks who believe, rightfully so, that they've been on the losing end of the criminal justice scorecard for a millennium, how do you not have them go, you know what, I'm just going to take one for the team, and I'm going to be able to go home and say to my people, I tried to make it right.
Attorney, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, our guest, Attorney Diana Tennis, and, of course, Dr. Ken Raybach. You're listening to The Don Miller Show. We'll be back in a moment. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of The Don Miller Show. Our guest tonight, Dr. Ken Raybach, professor of journalism, and, of course, Attorney Diana Tennis. Very prominent attorney. She knows exactly what she's talking about. Attorney, before we went to break, you said something that I've been singing and preaching about on this show for a long time, and that is the disparity, the real crisis of crack versus powder.
Yeah.
And there are more black men incarcerated in America's prisons for that than anything else. But there are no marches, and Sharpton and those guys won't get involved in that.
Right.
And that is why I see this situation as all about hype. So I am concerned that Mr. Zimmerman, no matter what the outcome, and you just mentioned, he could end up being a casualty of conflict. You can have people just say, look, I ain't want nothing to do with this. Let's just get this over with. I got to go back to my neighborhood. I don't ever want to find out that I was on this jury. I don't want to riot in Seminole County. I live here. I go to jail, man. No matter what your case is, go to jail. Correct?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
We could see that.
I totally agree with that. It's like, what is the easy solution for anger? Fixing sentencing disparity is a difficult, entrenched, legislative problem. I mean, try getting anything done in any state legislature, not just our own, versus pull the trigger, so to speak, on the white guy who is a bonehead and an idiot at the very least, and maybe a murderer, and maybe is enough. I mean, maybe shouldn't be enough. It's supposed to be beyond a reasonable doubt. But I think it would be very tempting to take your local justice back and get the one thing that you can. I think that would be very tempting for a lot of people.
Go ahead, Doc.
That would be your only comment.
Dr. Raybach.
Yes.
Go ahead. Hello?
Yes.
Okay, you were saying something.
No, before the program concludes, I wanted to get back to the topic of what actually causes a riot to build, and what the raw materials are that contribute to that.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up real quick the legal conversation and her thoughts. Because she is presenting an interesting conversation. And attorney, one thing about you are, and that's why I appreciate you, you're pretty unfiltered in terms of your opinion. And you see, just as I see, the significant disparity as it relates to the relationship with cops in America and black folk, or the perception of that relationship. I know for a fact that it ain't no love there, okay? You also understand, as someone who's practiced in the courthouse in Seminole County, the relationship and the horrible position that the Sanford Police Department has been in for a long, long time. So there are a lot of balls dropped, and I think if the anger is at anybody, it should be at the Sanford Police Department. Yet they seem to be getting a pass on this.
Well, God darn it, Don, don't make me defend.
I know,
for gosh sakes. I think that the biggest crime committed by Sanford PD was one of horrific stupidity and PR.
Yes.
I think they genuinely tried to follow that law, as convoluted as that immunity statute is.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
And I think at some point, either charges would have been brought or weren't. And I can't believe I'm saying this publicly, but I think that the state attorney's office threw them under the bus.
Absolutely.
By not supporting their decision to go slow and investigate, and not, because otherwise, if they'd rushed to judgment, and that's what they usually do, that's why I can't believe I'm saying this, they would have arrested first, asked questions later, and then when the lawsuit came, we would have all been saying, why are we paying a lawsuit, Sanford PD? Why didn't you follow the immunity statute? So they were in a catch-22.
Absolutely.
It was a horrible PR. It was a debacle, and I feel for them. And now it's just made the whole thing more of a cloudy mess.
Absolutely. Listen, Attorney, we thank you so much for joining us at the last minute. Our guest, Diana Tennis, you can find her at the tennis law firm in Orlando on Yale Street. She is a great guest. You'll be covering this trial for Fox, correct?
I will. Every day.
Every day. So you can tune in and to watch her, and she will be providing, quite frankly, unfiltered conversation, and she is a legal scholar. So, Diana, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Absolutely. Diana Tennis, attorney at law. Our guest is also joining us, Professor Ken Raybach. He is a longtime reporter, journalist, and he has been out on the forefront, and he is a scholar in terms of his ability to engage in conversations that are difficult for many, even me. Professor, let's talk about the whole conversation of people saying that the National Guard is on stand down, is on edge, and they may be engaged in this conversation and rioting. What makes people decide that it is in the best interest of them to go and become ignorant, quite frankly?
Well, it's really it's fascinating if you're in the middle of a riot, and I guess I've been in the middle of a lot of them.
Yes, you have.
Since I started in journalism, and it's really charismatic figures who arise in the middle of kind of a situation that's just building, and it seems like it has to be attached to certain individuals. After the Tigers won the World Series in, I guess it was '84, it was kind of an interesting situation because several people out of the crowd tried to climb this billboard.
I remember that.
Right outside, on Trumbull and Michigan Avenue.
Yep.
And they would get up to the top of it, and they'd start waving their arms and making gestures and stuff like that, and nothing would really happen. They just wouldn't really capture the imagination of the crowd. This would be 1984, actually. And then a guy who looked like Jim Morrison, the lead singer for The Doors, got up there and took off his shirt and then ultimately took off his pants and started waving his arms. And because of his personal charisma, he just riveted the crowd. So it's almost like a passing of the baton. Somebody has to arise and emerge and capture the sensibilities of the crowd and rivet their attention and receive their authorization to be like the point person for the whole event.
So again, you make a really good point, and you covered that. And you also, in 1968, when rioting was at its peak in that area, the Tigers won, and there was no riot, correct?
No, there were riots. They just didn't call them that.
Oh, okay.
People were just out in the streets, and the riot police were sent out on horseback. And there's really an interrelationship between law enforcement and the people who are out in the streets too, where it's almost like ESP. There's a metaphysical element to it, where at a certain point, without really saying anything, the police officers charge the crowd.
That's a good question. That's what I want to ask you. So talk to me about the presence of large numbers of police officers and how the crowd sees that. Say, for example, you got the horses out and nobody even has this conversation in mind. How important is it for the authorities to kind of stand down at a situation like this, and do they drive the mindset of those who are already on edge? We're going to take a break. Our guest, Dr. Ken Raybach. We're talking about the Trayvon Martin case, social media. We're talking about the thoughts of rioting and the conversation of rioting being heard all over town here. You're listening to The Don Miller Show. We'll be back in a moment. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of The Don Miller Show. Our guest, Dr. Ken Raybach. He is a professor of journalism, a longtime reporter who spent time covering the riots of Detroit. He was all over this country. He's been a reporter and journalist, a professor. Dr. Raybach, I wanted to talk to you briefly before we went to break when I was talking about the propensity for over-policing. How does that affect the mindset of people? There are going to be people standing outside the courthouse.
Already on edge.
On edge. How important is it to not have a police presence that is intimidating to those people? And does that play into the whole mindset?
It takes tremendous restraint. And in fact, in Detroit, when I call it monthly riots because whatever event happened that riveted the entire society of Detroit could result in celebrating in the streets.
Yeah, anything. Halloween.
Yeah, always involved, turning over police cars, burning things, and civil disobedience. The police had to exercise incredible restraint because if they charged into the crowd or they exacerbated the tensions with the crowd, it immediately made things worse because it was a real we or they kind of mentality. So it was just extremely dangerous and catalytic to the crowd. They were waiting for any affront in order to spill over. But there's an analogy here available where the crowd reaches critical mass and at a certain point explodes, and it's almost a quantum effect. And I think that's the thing that we'll probably be looking at as we kind of reorganize our research base on what causes rioting in the streets, is that at a certain point it just simply spills over, it becomes uncontainable, and it breaks the symmetry. Because you have a symmetry that is, you have an equal balance of police officers and people in the crowd. Crowd is usually way bigger, like 30,000 people, maybe 200 police officers.
Right.
And at some point, that symmetry, that balance is totally broken, and you never know at what point that will happen. That's the part that is totally unpredictable. So that's the kind of situation you might foresee, where the tensions in the crowd just waiting for an affront, just waiting for a catalytic event to occur, and then suddenly it will just simply spill over. But it's almost like a quantum effect, but nobody knows what will cause that quantum spillover, the symmetry to break and chaos to ensue.
Okay.
And you can feel it if you're in the crowd when a riot takes place. I mean, going back to the riots in Detroit following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there's just something in the air that you can sense, and I don't think that's something we're totally clear on and we've completely identified, but that's the point at which things spill over
Dr. K?
into chaos.
I wanted to ask you a question, Dr. K.
Sure.
What do you think is the, this is April, by the way, what do you think is the methodology and or the psychology behind the inflammation of the case? I mean, what do you think what is the point of doing that, and why is that happening? Why is that being done?
I just have to go back to the sources, and in the research, when you go back to the original sources that discuss the possibility of rioting, they all seem to be right-wing groups, and it really seems to be a seed that the right wing is trying to plant purposefully. So
yes, I agree.
Yeah, in a way, they're trying to paint the black community in general as prone to violence. So be very cautious with this verdict because you might inflame, the black community to riot.
Okay.
Which hasn't happened maybe since Rodney King, but you can't really, clearly define the events that have occurred that you could characterize as, spontaneous riots.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure I'm clear. I know what right wing mean, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear when you say the right wing is planting the seed, because
it's really covering the spectrum between conservative influence groups all the way to white supremacist organizations. And if you kind of trace the internet memes and the way that those have come about, I mean, Don's been talking about Al Sharpton making some references, but if you trace back the source of most of the action on the internet, it's been white supremacist groups as well as conservative Republican groups.
It almost seems to me, though, Dr. K, that a lot of the black leaders are trying to inflame the situation instead of calming, people as a whole and saying, okay, let's just, take a breath. Let's get justice, let's do this in a methodical fashion. It almost seems like they're inciting some sort of riots or, inflaming the situation. And I just don't understand, why. I don't understand it.
haven't seen as much of that, but
that's what you're not going to get an answer from him because he's already. That's why I asked. That's why I needed clarification about the right wing because I don't see the right wing being the.
Dr. K could be a juror.
Yeah.
He could be a juror.
So he's not going to answer that for you.
That's what I'm seeing here, and
rappers too. No, I really won't purposely try to evade any question.
No, of course not. No.
Ken's our friend. Listen.
I think that one of our guests, and now I'm forgetting who it was exactly, said there's really some justification for anger and outrage.
That was a professor, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's there. I think that's pretty evident. So I think from
but again, I don't understand, and maybe it's because I am so close to this.
I don't see.
And I am in this community. I don't see
the right wing.
I think the justification for anger and outrage should be at the disparity with crack and powder cocaine, or with the fact that more African Americans are out of work than any segment of the society, or the fact that black women are having babies out of wedlock and lead the nation in abortions. I think black folk got a whole lot of stuff to be angry about. I'm serious. Or their president that they love.
Really expanded, but I think
they need to be mad at Obama that they love, who's kicked them in the face.
But Dr. K,
I'm sorry,
I have to go back to this,
terrible.
Your perception about the right wing, because if that were the case, the numbers wouldn't add up. The numbers are saying that more black people, and we don't have a tendency to be on the right too often, but more black people have made up their minds about this case, not based on facts, but based on misinformation that's been presented by the media, and they're not open to hearing any facts about this case. They've made up their mind. They're emotionally invested in this case, regardless of what evidence is presented. So I just don't understand how we're not a part of driving this race conversation, nor do I understand why there's justification in pushing this as a race conversation, because it does us such a disservice at the end of the day, regardless of who wins.
It just has to go back to the original event itself and whether the circumstances are still reducible to the fact that a young black man coming back from the store with Skittles, despite his unusual background, was pursued and eventually killed by a neighborhood watch volunteer who had a slightly racist attitude.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's...
But did he really have a racist attitude? Because most people who think he had a racist attitude think that he called 911 and said, there's a black guy in my neighborhood and he looks suspicious. However, that's not the fact. The fact is the 911 person or officer asked him, was he black, white, but
and the call was edited.
They asked him his race. He did not initiate the race, what his race was.
And the call was edited by a network who later paid a settlement and fired an employee. Doc, listen, we're getting ready to wrap up. We want to thank you. He is always here on the show. He's our guest, Dr. Ken Raybach. He's a professor. He is a great musician. Doc, I want people to know you are a great jazz musician also. And where can they find you in the local area?
Well, we're not playing right now. We take some time off during the summer, but we'll be back up. Just watch the Sentinel listings, the listings in the Orlando Weekly.
Okay.
And we'll be back up and around. Our next gig is going to be at a place called the High Society. It'll be a Wednesday night jazz jam.
Okay.
And that's where we go to regroup and invite people in, and it's very casual, very relaxed.
And it's a bunch of scholars playing music.
Yeah, it actually is. We got a bunch of people with degrees.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ken Raybach.
All right.
Thank you very much. Listen, we're going to go back over to the phone lines.
Hey, Jay, you're on the Don Miller Show.
Hi, nice to talk with you again. I'm glad to hear you all back on the air.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I really feel I'm really impressed with your conversations tonight. I really feel like you all hit all the major points, and my biggest fear and my upset is that some of this is going to get driven to a point where we're not going to know whether or not what verdict we got is justice or not.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I think we're already there.
Everyone's coming with an opinion, and I believe what Tamika was saying was absolutely correct. I think a lot of the uncertainty about what's going to happen started getting driven by the media in some respects when they tried to portray Zimmerman in a certain light before all the information was out.
Mm-hmm.
I was just as outraged as anyone on my Facebook post.
Absolutely.
You got to have a trial.
Right.
You got to at least find out what's going on. But it's become so polarized and so many things working against the defense that now you're like, is there going to be a fair trial, or is this just going to be a railroad job? And that incites even more anger.
And see, again, Jay, you make an interesting point. Jay just said something in the initial conversation about this case. I tell you, my friends who are not of color were just as outraged as I was. Mm-hmm. And it was anger in my community. We're all upset. We want to know what happened, especially when we realized that the portrayal, the way it came out, and then all of a sudden it went from being a whodunit or how it happened to a racial conversation. And nobody wins because, again, you just mentioned the railroad job. Will this... Look, I want justice to be done. I don't have a whole lot of faith in the criminal justice system simply because, let's be honest, I'm a black guy. And where I come from, it ain't always been fair, Jay. But I do believe that we should stand down and allow the conversation and the criminal justice system to present the defense to present its case. And for African Americans to jump in and already have an opinion, I just want you, don't be mad if ain't none of y'all on the jury, okay? And that's the challenge we face. We do have a problem with the system, absolutely. But we also have to take a moment and just kind of give it an opportunity for the story to come out. Jay, thank you so much, man. Keep listening.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. D'Amica Page, listen.
Let me say this, because you say as a black man, you know, you express your concerns about the justice system because it hasn't always been fair. But this is my...
It ain't fair.
But
it's
this is my thing.
But
we see too many black people black men, I'm going to say black men specifically, who know that to be the case. So you would think that they would be on the side of fairness, because we've been on the side of unfairness. So we're on the side of fairness, but we're not seeing that, though. No. We're not seeing that in this case. There are more black men who are on the side of unfairness based on misinformation, you know, and not facts. And I find that to be very disturbing. Either you're for fairness or you're not. It can't change when the color change.
Right.
I agree with that.
You know, and again, just as Dr. Raybach just said before he left, he said that this young kid was pursued and killed. And things like that, we have to be careful with.
Because it's not...
We got to be careful with the way we say that kind of stuff, okay?
It's a little off.
Okay? Pursued and killed. Listen, I'm not saying, look, whatever happens, I believe that the system is going to attempt to do the best it can. I personally believe Mr. Zimmerman...
I think we lose at the end of the day, regardless of the verdict. I'm sorry.
Going to lose as well.
Mr. Zimmerman will not get a fair trial. He will not get a fair trial. I'm sorry. Because even the white folk on that jury are concerned about what's going to happen if they sit back and engage fairly. I'm telling you. Because they want to go home to quiet environments. At some point, these people's names are going to get out. So, can you imagine? Mm-hmm. This is not going to be good for anybody involved. It's not going to be good for the community. How do we fix it? I think we continue to engage. And you listen to the Don Miller Show. We'll be back after this break.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a Monday live edition of the Don Miller Show on your hometown station, 1520 WBZW, and streaming on 660 WORL. Listen, if you have some questions or comments about the Trayvon Martin conversation, social media, the whole 9 yards, give us a call, 407-774-8255. Hey, Dave, you're on the Don Miller Show.
Yes, I have a question for you. The guest you had on just a moment ago before the break,
Dr. K,
he teaches journalism.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he said, and if I understood him correctly, because most of it was gibberish, but he said that the right wing is behind all of the riots.
Yes.
Isn't journalism supposed to be a finder of fact and just you go where the facts lead you and you find out who, what, when, where, how, and why of a story? But if he's already determined that the right wing is behind everything, I'd ask for a damn refund if I was in his class. Are you kidding me?
We were just discussing that.
How in the hell can he get on radio and say the right wing's behind everything and yet be a professor in good standing when he's supposed to be impartial? He wouldn't know a difference between a pile of Shinola and you know what? And that's on a good day.
Listen, thank you.
What am I missing here?
You know,
you're not missing anything.
Have you ever heard of Tawana Brawley or Freddie's Fashion Mart or the riots in Cincinnati from the police shootings there?
Yeah, I'm very familiar.
Really?
Yes, you know.
He ought to be selling shoes.
Thank you so much, Dave. But again, we're talking in the break about what's happening in Sanford right now. In April, you talked a little bit about what's going on with property value.
Yeah, it's really affecting the property values there. It's affecting people that come out of town that want to move to a nice community in Florida, and they hear the word Sanford, and a lot of people don't even want to look at a house there. Mm-hmm. Also, it's affecting the businesses, the Bike Week and such. I know some people that own businesses in downtown Sanford, and it was 30% of what the usual total of a number of people that come through there showed up this year and last year. And it's just a shame because it's a beautiful community, it's a wonderful community, and the way that the news has been reporting it, and also they also make it seem like this happened in some less than desirable part of town, and it was actually a very beautiful area. It's a very nice area.
And I had this fight, D'Amica, if you recall, on British Broadcasting when I was taken to task about what kind of neighborhood it was.
Right.
But again, no, people don't know.
Right.
They're listening to 80. Their information is coming like 10 times down the road, and they are just not. They don't know what they're saying. And again, when you start to talk about being pursued and shot down like a dog in the street and all these things I've heard, and I'm saying, wait a minute, this was an altercation. People said this was an altercation. This was two people engaged in an altercation. Now, granted, the recorded message of the dispatcher tells Mr. Zimmerman to get back in the car, and he probably should have gotten back in the car. But he did not break the law there because that was not a sworn officer telling him to get back in the car. But when we present this kind of conversation, we have to be careful. Look, this is a horrible situation. No matter what happens, a young man lost his life that night.
Right.
It is horrible.
Right.
But I am more concerned about engaging more young men because in my mind, as a black guy who just has the opportunity to sit by a microphone and engage nightly to all types of people. My concern is that there is not an epidemic in America of white men killing young black men, but there is an epidemic in America of black men killing black men. So if we are going to march, if we are going to riot and engage, let's do so at the hands of trying to save somebody who looks like us. This is a horrible story, no question about it. But last year in Chicago, 800 almost young black men were killed by guess who? Other young black men. And Sharpton has yet to do a live broadcast from Inglewood. Come on now, we got to be serious about these type of conversations. Or if you look at Detroit, where they're dying in the streets, why no live broadcast? Why no live broadcast about the disparity with crack and powder cocaine? Why no disparity about unemployment in double digits and almost 20% for young black men and women? See, we got to pick our spots because we tend to look like damn fools, black folk, when we allow them to suck us into ridiculous dialogue. This is a tragedy. I repeat, a tragedy. A young man lost his life that night. I don't know if Mr. Zimmerman was defending himself. We don't know what happened. But what I can tell you, if we are real with ourselves as black people, and if we are concerned as black folk and trying to save the next Trayvon, then we have to have this conversation for real.
But now, how do you have this conversation when you have some black men that ask the question, why should he have had to run? Why should he?
Because you run to live another day.
Agreed.
And just because you run don't mean you're a punk. So you got to understand the mindset of those who grow up in inner city. We are taught ridiculousness from year one, from young black men when they put things in our minds that stuff like men don't cry. That's ridiculous. I cry.
All the time.
Okay? The fact of the matter is we present to these young people ridiculousness. We give them BET and this nonsense to put in their minds that they're hard. You're not hard. You will be killed. You try the wrong person. You step to the wrong person.
That's exactly right.
You will be murdered in the street, because I swear to God, I'll kill a 15-year-old it's just like he's a 25-year-old if I'm trying to be here. If I'm trying to protect myself and I feel like my life is in jeopardy and I'm getting beat down, please understand what I'm going to do. I got to protect myself. So we got to stop it. And we got to stop talking about how we hate the NRA and how the Republicans are horrible people and the right wing is leading the media. Right wing ain't leading no damn media. That's liberal media. Cut it out. Don't get sucked in. And if you're going to march in Sanford, I encourage you to march with an attitude about taking from this situation how we can save the next young man who finds himself in a situation where he may have the ability to retreat. Look, I took this to the hood. D'Amica, you know that.
Oh, yes.
I took it to the hood, and I sat under the tree and drank a 40 with a gentleman who had been in jail for 20 years, and he was 47, and he had spent 25 of that 47 years in the joint. And I asked him what he thought of this case. And he said to me in a term that I have to break down maybe to some of you, but many of you understand. He said, Don, I've been in jail most of my life. But these jits think they hard. He say, I'm 40-something years old, and I've been locked up, and I done robbed, and I done pillaged. But if I'm walking down the street, and a white dude is following me, he say either two things. He the police or he crazy. Neither of which I want nothing to do with. You follow me? So I'm going to figure out how I can get out of that situation. He say, but sometimes these young folk, through the vehicle of BET and this nonsensical rap environment, start to believe they're tough. Ain't nothing tough about being locked up. Ain't nothing cool about being locked up. Something cool about living again tomorrow. Something cool about changing your circumstances and respecting your parents. Something cool about being educated and having opportunity. Something cool about raising your damn kids. Tough ain't cool. There are more tough guys in the cemetery on the south side of Chicago than anywhere else. Tough gets you taken out. So we have to take this opportunity and look at this situation and say, we're going to pray for this family or this young man, because no mother deserves to lose her child. It's horrible.
Of course.
We need to engage in the conversation of seeing at-risk young people, because I know y'all might be a little offended by this. Trayvon was at risk. Yeah, he was. It ain't admissible in a court of law. But Trayvon Martin was at risk. I'm telling you that. Let's pray for his family that they find comfort. But let's stop fooling ourselves. Let's save the next Trayvon. And we do that by real conversation. You listen to the damn Don Miller Show. Bye, everybody.